All right, Alexander. Boris Johnson is now coming back, it seems. I don't know if he'll become prime minister, but he's definitely throwing his hat in the ring. Nothing's going to change with Boris, so it doesn't matter who they put in. I'm going to stand with my thinking into all of this. Doesn't matter who sits in that chair, who's in 10 Downing Street. Until you roll back the sanctions, stop the sanctions, and then roll them back, nothing is going to change. Nothing.
Absolutely
It's just
correct.
going to get worse.
I entirely agree with that. The very fact, by the way, that it is now looking increasingly possible that Boris may indeed be coming back tells us two things. Firstly, I think it is now universally acknowledged in Britain that what we said last week, that there was a plot underway. Remember, we said that before Kwarteng fell and all of that, when with the governor of the Bank of England creating chaos in the gilt market to bring down first Kwarteng and then Truss. Well, that is now the consensus in Britain. It's now generally acknowledged in Britain that there was indeed a plot. But the plotters have botched it, because the one thing that they were not intending is that Boris would come back and would be able to launch a really effective challenge for the leadership. They certainly do not want Boris back. Not because Boris is going to change anything in Ukraine, not because Boris is somebody that altogether, they have fundamental issues with, but because Boris is he's a bad manager, he's lazy, he's inefficient, and of course, important issue, he still embodies Brexit. He's still somebody who is associated with Brexit. And the Remain establishment, for that reason, will never forgive him. Now, the problem is, their anointed successor, who was Rishi Sunak, clearly is running into a lot of opposition from Conservative MPs, from those Conservative MPs who were elected in 2019 from the former Labour voting, working class, pro-Brexit constituencies in Northern England and the Midlands. And so the whole plot was about leveraging Sunak into office as Prime Minister in an uncontested election. It's now not happening. And there is a serious possibility, especially if there is no consensus within the Conservative Parliamentary Party, that we could have a vote to the membership, and the membership might indeed prefer Boris. Now, if that happens, there's a real possibility, or so it seems to me, that the Conservative Party will split. Because bear in mind, just a few weeks ago, the same Remainer establishment was working to remove Boris. Now, if he becomes Prime Minister again, they can't remove him a second time through a second plot, because that would be just too ridiculous. At the same time, they're not realistically going to be comfortable working with him again. I mean, they said so many terrible things about him. They said that he was incompetent, that he was corrupt, that he was lazy, that he was dishonest, that he was a compulsive liar. How do they work with Boris? So they can't work with Boris. Besides, they detest him and he detests them. So there is now, it seems to me, a real possibility of, if Boris wins this election, of the Conservative Party splitting, in which case a general election looks inevitable, in which case Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister of Britain. And I wonder, actually, if in the event that he does look like Boris is going to win, that there are already some people who are planning that outcome, given what I have repeatedly been saying all along, that the British permanent state wants Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. That is the person they actually want, not Rishi Sunak, not Jeremy Hunt, not any of the other people you're hearing about.
Aside from the fact that Boris coming back and then Keir Starmer taking over, and no policy is really changing because it seems like the Tories and Labour have become the same uniparty, and the fact that no one is going to stop the sanctions or roll things back. They're just going to continue to escalate the war in Ukraine, which to me just means that that the UK is the economic situation is going to continue to sink. I mean, it's guaranteed. The more they continue with Ukraine, the more of a guarantee that that the UK economic situation is going to deteriorate. Taking all that aside, how does this affect all of this that's going on? How does this affect brand UK?
Well, it is
The
disastrous.
reputation of the UK, you know what I mean by brand UK? I mean,
Absolutely.
its reputation, its all of the mystique around the UK, say the Union Jack, the history, the culture,
The United
all
Kingdom
of
of
it.
Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the country that had, this great empire that has the world's oldest currency, that has all the, palaces and cathedrals and this army with its uniforms and its parades and all of that, all the pomp and circumstance and splendor, which once upon a time means something. And, the constitutional system, the world's oldest, well, not actually the world's oldest, but, its constitution that reaches all the way back to, the time of King Offa in the 6th century. Well, how does it affect it? It destroys it. It trashes it. Who's going to take Britain seriously after all of these events? I mean, who is going to look at Britain and think that this is a serious country with a real economy, a real government, when they look at the complete meltdown and farce that we're seeing in Britain now? And you're asking me that question. I'm responding to you in the way that I just have. If you read the British media over the last couple of days, they are full of these articles making exactly that point, that Britain is becoming an emerging economy, that it's a banana republic. You see lots of people saying these things. Now, I don't think we're quite at that level yet, but countries, really well-run countries, don't experience coups. And since, as I said, the consensus is that what's just happened is a coup, that already tells you that we're not the first-rate country that we pretend to be. Now, can I just return to the topic of Keir Starmer and the fact that he has absolutely no ideas? We got a vivid illustration of that on Wednesday. Liz Truss was mortally wounded. It was clear by that point that she was on her way out. She was, fatally undermined. She's losing a contest with a lettuce. I mean, this particular joke really caught traction in Britain and indeed around the world. So she's been hiding away in Downing Street. She hasn't faced Parliament. But on Wednesday, she has to come to Parliament and confront Keir Starmer in Prime Minister's questions. And the universal expectation was that Starmer would take on this incompetent, weak, frightened Prime Minister and would wipe the floor on her. And he didn't. He completely fluffed it. She actually, if anything, scored off him. Now, that tells you what a non-entity Keir Starmer ultimately is. If he can't win a parliamentary battle against Liz Truss when Liz Truss is hours away from losing office, well, then he's not somebody who can be taken seriously as this country's Prime Minister to guide Britain out of the troubles and the problems that it faces. Now, I have to say, saying all of this, this is a tragedy for Britain. It's a tragedy for the British people. They've made a whole succession of electoral choices, which I think were entirely rational electoral choices. They have been betrayed by the political class, and they have been betrayed by the political system, and they are not responsible for this disaster that has been inflicted on them.
Okay, so is the political class, I was thinking about this today, as I was walking around. How am I going to phrase this to you? Is the political class, the globalist class, are they or were they so furious with Brexit that they decided that we are indeed going to destroy the country and make it so that the average everyday citizen in Britain is going to be so demoralized, so defeated, that we will never get this type of dissent
Yes.
with Brexit again, that we're never going to get this type of...
I understand what you mean, that they want to discredit Brexit so completely that there's never going to be a rebellion against them in the way that the Brexit...
Not only Brexit.
Yeah, not exactly.
Not only Brexit, everything.
Everything. Exactly.
We are not going to tolerate... It kind of reminds me of like Trump MAGA in a way. I don't want to, I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the globalist class saying, you know what, we're going to devastate all of you. When I mean you, I mean all the citizens, all of you guys. We're going to just devastate you so that you're going to be so concerned with just everyday, mundane, just trying to survive. You're going to be so concerned with just basic survival that you're not even going to think about big picture stuff like Brexit or the EU or conflict in Ukraine or anything like that.
I've no doubt that is the agenda. I mean, the thing to understand about the British political class is that what made them so angry and so frightened about Brexit is that they saw it as an attack on themselves. And they understood that correctly. They understood that the British public, the British electorate, the British people were becoming increasingly discontented with the Blairite. It is a Blairite political class, regardless of which party it belongs to. So they voted for Brexit, partly because they associate the British political class, the Blairite class, with the EU, not without cause, by the way, and by weakening Britain's links with the EU, there was a sense that that might actually weaken some of the hold that the current political class has on Britain. And that's certainly how the British political class saw it. They saw this as an attack first and foremost on themselves. And ever since 2016, they have been on a rampage to stamp this down. So they moved to smash Corbynism on the left. You may completely disagree with Corbyn and everything that he stood for. But, I mean, he was obliterated. And, of course, they've moved to dismantle Brexit. And they've moved to dismantle everything associated with Brexit. And I think you're quite correct. If they create a desert, well, it's a desert over which they can at least control, because the British people, like the Greek people, after the economic crises there, after the 2008 crisis, will now be too demoralised, too frightened to actually come out and protest and, want to make any serious challenge to the political class that rules them. So, and there is an element of that. I mean, I don't think more than, I think it's just an element. I think there's a very, very strong feeling about that. The problem is, and this is what I always say, if that is your policy, well, maybe you will retain control, but you will retain control of a country that is now in rapid decline. And in its decline, it is taking you down with it. Because ultimately, what made the British political class globally important and powerful and made it an important part of the globalist system was precisely that Britain mattered. If Britain no longer matters, well, they just become bit players and nobody takes them seriously, which comes back to your first question. What is this all doing to Team UK? And it's trashing the image and it's trashing the reality behind it. And ultimately, not just the British people, but the political class themselves will be the losers. But they probably don't see it that way.
Yeah, but, yeah, maybe these people, they see it in terms of, I've already graduated to the globalist class, so I don't see country anymore. To me, country is something that's lower.
Yes.
I'm already up here and I'm looking from above at everything. So, if I have to destroy the UK in order to rule over it, along with my other globalist buddies, well, then so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is true. In fact, I'm going to say something. I think that sentiment is actually stronger in Britain than it is even in the US itself. It's very difficult if you don't know Britain to know the extent to which London, which is the city where I live, parts of it have completely detached themselves from the rest of Britain. I mean, London conceives of itself, at least no, I don't say London. I mean, some of the people who live here who are, globalists to the core, they no longer conceive of themselves as belonging to a Britain, other parts of which they barely visit, by the way. They see themselves as a global city, as they would like to say, part of Europe, part of the world. They don't feel any real sense of connection with the country of which London is nominally the capital. That isn't true of all Londoners by any means. There's a significant group of people who do think in exactly that way and who will express themselves quite openly in that kind of way, more so even than you would get in most of the United States. Perhaps in San Francisco you'd find some people who think and talk like that. In London, quite a few people do.
Right. So what do the people of Britain do now? What do they do now? Do they continue to watch their money get sent to Zelensky, which is what's happening? Do they continue to watch their military get demilitarized, which is what's happening? Do they continue to watch their pound go down the toilet, which is what's happening? Do they watch their society collapse? Do they watch crime go up? Do they watch their neighborhoods decay? I mean, what do the people do? Because you brought up Greece, and I'll tell you from my experience with Greece. When the EU decided to crush Greece and demoralize Greece, and that was what the EU set out to do, it worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
It worked.
Well,
It absolutely worked. And Greece is today's Greek, and the today's Greek people.
Yeah.
They don't have the spirit that they had 20 years ago. That's for sure. Before we entered the EU, 25 years ago, we are two completely different. It's just a whole different feeling.
Yes.
You don't have that fight in you.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's been beaten out.
Yes.
Is that what's going to happen to the people in Britain, or what? What happens?
Well,
next?
it may do, but I actually don't think so. I think this is a very tough-minded and stubborn electorate. It doesn't seem so because on the surface it can look pretty docile. But I think what is much more likely to happen is that after the shock of these events, probably after a certain period of time, you're going to see a massive political reaction, and that wouldn't be the first time that has happened in Britain. And I'm not going to predict what that political reaction would be. But my own sense is, traveling around Britain, which I do, unlike, as I said, a lot of these people who inhabit London and have very little idea what goes on north of Watford, for example. I sense that there is this long fuse of anger that is gradually working its way. And I think sooner or later we are going to see a big political and electoral smash. The big question is, what does the political class do in that case? I mean, it's easy, for example, for them to say that they'll send the police out. But again, I know people in the police. I know people connected to the police. My sense is that they're as disgusted with the political class as most of the rest of the population is. And I don't know people in the military to the same extent, but I think that the levers of power, they might find that, if there was a real crisis, they might be very difficult to work in order to retain control if there was a real challenge. if there was a major sustained challenge, which they might not be able to sort out except by doing, turning to these very authoritarian solutions that we've been talking about. So I think on balance, we will see a major reaction and probably a political smash. But, it may take some time to work through.
All right. We'll see if the UK has that time.
Yeah, well, that's another question, of
See.
course. That is another question entirely, of course.
Okay. We'll leave it there. TheDuran.locals.com. Look for us on Rockfin as well. I will have the links down below. And Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.